To those who believe that Republicans will stand firm on principle and check the authoritarian impulses of Donald Trump, you may have doubts once you see MAGA Republican politicians do things like publicly refer to him as daddy, or publicly say that if he says jump 3 feet high and scratch your head, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. We are truly in the hands and at the mercy of a cult. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends. The Republican Party is an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle and no real talent for or interest in responsible governance. This is how I've described the GOP for about a year and a half, 2 years now, and I stand by it. And when you see things like the things I'm about to show you, I suspect you'll believe it too. And given that they will control in January the White House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and they already have a supermajority in the Supreme Court, this is something we should take deadly seriously. So here's a Republican politician publicly referring to Donald Trump as daddy.
Even in the Mideast, where Hamas is saying, well, we were just trying to defend ourselves, or, countries indicating that they're going to be good boys and girls now, just to liken it to an old parable here, daddy's home, and things are going to change, and we're going to go back to being a strong America.
Yeah. So that's an adult Republican politician, Jeff Van Drew, referring to Donald Trump as daddy. And you might be thinking, okay, that's just a tongue-in-cheek phrase. It's an outlier. I will remind you of other prominent recent examples of Donald Trump being referred to as daddy by voters and supporters and major MAGA influencers. But before I do, I want to give you another example of the cultishness that we are seeing in the aftermath of Trump's November 5th victory. And this is another MAGA Republican Congressman, Troy Nehls, talking about how literally they should take Trump's orders. And really, it's a hierarchical relationship, damn it. We're supposed to do whatever Donald Trump says. He's perfect and he's never wrong. And he gives a specific example of how literal Trump's command over them really is.
There's no question he's the leader of our party. So now he's got a mission statement, his mission and his goals and objectives, whatever that is, we need to embrace it. All of it. Every single word. If Donald Trump says jump 3 feet high and scratch your head, we all jump 3 feet high and scratch our heads.
Yeah, that's another man elected to Congress, saying that if Donald Trump says jump 3 feet high and scratch your head, it's exactly what you do. He went on to say that Donald Trump is literally never wrong when discussing Donald Trump's, parade of horribles in terms of the cabinet nominees. Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, Fox News host Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. And you want to double down on the idea that Donald Trump is not wrong, cannot be wrong because he is so perfect? Again, this would be deranged enough if this were coming from high school students or college students or people like in a literal cult. But these are the cultish pronouncements of adult people who are elected to some of the highest offices in the country, wielding enormous power on behalf of their constituents. And they're behaving like a cult. But again, the whole daddy thing in particular, super gross. And I'll remind you of what multimillionaire media personality Tucker Carlson said. This is how he talked about Donald Trump at a Turning Point USA conference back in late October.
If you allow your hormone-addled 15-year-old daughter to slam the door of her bedroom and give you the finger, you're going to get more of it. And those kids are going to wind up in rehab. It's not good for you, and it's not good for them. No. There has to be a point at which dad comes home. Yeah, that's right. Dad comes home. And he's pissed. Dad is pissed. He's not vengeful. He loves his children. Disobedient as they may be, he loves them. Because they're his children, they live in his house. But he's very disappointed in their behavior. And he's gonna have to let them know. He's gonna have to get to your room right now and think about what you did. And when dad gets home, you know what he says? you've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not going to hurt me more than it hurts you. No, it's not. I'm not going to lie. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it hurts me. And you earned this. You're getting a vigorous spanking because you've been a bad girl. And it has to be this way. It has to be this way because it's true. And you're only going to get better when you take responsibility for what you did.
Also, an adult man. Is he a member of Congress? No, but again, a multi-millionaire, a conservative media personality, one of the most well-known in the world, a darling of the right. And he is referring to Donald Trump, and again, with an almost pornographic excitement. Like this, that was really kinky. I try not to kink shame, but that was strange. So Donald Trump, I suppose, in this metaphor, is daddy, and the disobedient daughter are Democrats. In this metaphor, liberals, progressives, women, marginalized groups, minorities, blue cities, blue states, America as a whole. And as a consequence of Trump winning the November 5th election, we're going to get a vigorous spanking. What the hell does that mean? How does that, what, I see the metaphor. What does that mean in terms of Trump becoming president? Political prosecutions, investigations? Is that what are these cabinet appointees, the vigorous spanking that we deserve? And the cheers that go along with it. Here's the thing, these aren't outliers. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Americans really embrace this notion, this strange metaphor where Donald Trump is a father figure. I mean, by all accounts, he's a terrible father and a terrible husband. He's not particularly emblematic of the party of family values to the extent that they really value family values in the first place. What does all this mean, and what does it entail for the future? And again, I got one more clip for you before we look into some articles here. But after Tucker Carlson said what he said at that Turning Point Action conference, this is what was reported once Trump stepped onto the stage, how the crowd reacted and what they said.
One thing that is new that I haven't heard is when Tucker Carlson was speaking tonight, he started to say that if Donald Trump were to win, it would be like, quote, daddy's home, daddy's coming home. And he said that Trump, like God, loves all of his children, talking about the mainstream media, in his words, and Democrats, and said that Trump would need to give them a good spanking. Now, this is something the crowd went wild for here. There are thousands of people here. And when Trump came on stage, as you can see, speaking behind me, they started screaming and chanting "Daddy's home" and "Daddy Dawn." So this is something I have not heard at a Trump rally so far, but I can tell you the vibe in the room tonight does almost feel like a mini RNC. And
very cultish indeed. So then that gets us to these cabinet nominees, and Rolling Stone has a good article about this. Trump's extreme hires are about showing Republicans who's boss. One Trump transition team member says he wants to bend Republican senators to his will, quote, until they snap in half. Trump has nominated a roster of highly controversial and in some cases scandal-plagued MAGA chaos agents to serve in his cabinet and is planning to force them through the U.S. Senate, a chamber in which the incoming president will enjoy a new conservative majority. However, when it comes to some of Trump's picks so far, including Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, and Fox and Friends co-host Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, a number of Senate Republicans are privately hyperventilating about their party's leader, once again causing unnecessary melodrama and disorder at the dawn of his administration. Mere minutes after Gaetz' selection was announced, one GOP senator close to Trump simply told Rolling Stone, quote, "Our president is doing his best to give me a stroke." That was before Trump selected vaccine skeptic and conspiracy theorist RFK Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Conservatives on Capitol Hill are scrambling to figure out how exactly they would clear the way for several of his nominees, some of whom have track records that would have been immediately disqualifying in a different era. Gaetz, for instance, was literally investigated by the Justice Department, the agency he is now set to lead, over sex trafficking allegations. But this is a new day. It's the second Trump administration, one premised on the idea that the twice impeached former and now future leader of the free world has a mandate to impose his openly authoritarian, bloodthirsty, and revenge-focused vision on America. The ideological undergirding of the project is that Trump, in all the ways, deserves the opportunity to do whatever the hell he wants. And according to associates and transition personnel who have spoken to Trump about some of his recent picks, That is precisely what the point of his extreme elections is. It's not just that Trump wants these people in positions of enormous power and influence. It's that Trump, as he's privately remarked, wants to quash any sliver of opposition within his own party even before he's sworn in. And that starts with his ongoing efforts to force squeamish Senate Republicans to go along with his nominees, whether they like it or not. Quote, he wants to bend them to his will until they snap in half and then thank him for the privilege, says one Trump transition team member who has discussed the matter of appointments with the president-elect. Another person with direct knowledge of the situation says that Trump said within the past week, quote, we'll see who's loyal and who's not so loyal, referring to the GOP senators who try to stand in the way of or even object to some of his nominees to the highest and most consequential ranks of the federal government. Trump, this source adds, mentioned it was important to keep track of who was with him, full stop, on these nominations, and who sounds like a squish when pressed by reporters. Republicans will have a 53-47 seat majority Senate next year, and Vice President J.D. Vance to break any ties, so there will be some margin for error when it comes to confirming Trump's nominees. Even so, Trump has demanded that Republicans adjourn the Senate so he can make, quote, recess appointments, end quote, that would allow Trump to appoint controversial officials to his cabinet for 2 years at a time, without senators performing their duty to provide the president with advice and consent. So there you have it, folks. This is where we are. The Republican Party, which was always predisposed towards cultishness in the Trump era, and has only gotten even more so, the whole point of this exercise, at least in part, is to break the Republican Party. Donald Trump is on the warpath. And in order for him to do what he wants to do, he at least believes he needs a Republican Party which is 100% uniformly cultishly devoted to him, where there is no room for dissent or disagreement whatsoever. So he's testing them. And he sadistically wants to break them. Listen to the quote, break them in half and then have them thank him for the privilege of breaking them in half. It's an extremely sadistic, predatory mindset. And Donald Trump, you have to understand, is out for vengeance, yes, against the Democrats and against the American people, but also, I think, in part against his own party. It's part of the reason that I think, I speculated about this days ago, that he wants to appoint Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. I don't like Rubio. I think Rubio is a moral coward. Look at what he said about Donald Trump correctly in 2016 and how far he's fallen since. He's a politically inexpedient opportunist. He's a coward, much like Lindsey Graham. But he's not stupid, and he is qualified for the role. But I don't think that's why Trump's picking him, right? Because Matt Gaetz is not qualified for the role. Pete Hegseth is not qualified for the role. Tulsi Gabbard is not qualified for the role. RFK is not qualified for the role. He's picking these people for specific reasons. And I think for Marco Rubio is to take someone, to pluck someone who was a vociferous critic of him publicly in the 2016 elections, and then putting him in the executive branch directly under Trump, even more directly under Trump's control than he would have been in the Senate, because it's two different branches, and to force this neocon, Marco Rubio, to contradict himself the moment Donald Trump demands that he do. A guy who will go from neocon, principled neocon, to the extent that you like neocons at all, at least there's a principle behind it, to whatever the hell Trump is, this ideologically inconsistent populist and non-interventionist, this isolationist, at the drop of a hat. I think it's because he wants to see Marco Rubio debase himself and his personal history and his standards in public, and he have a front row seat to it. I think that's part of the reason. And when I read reports like this, I believe it even more, that this really is in part about punishing the Republican Party, sadistically taking out his wrath on his own party and purging it literally of any dissent whatsoever. And so when people say, I believe the Republicans will hold Trump in check, I suppose it's possible, but the evidence to me sits squarely on the side that they will ultimately bend the knee to whatever the cult leader happens to want. And I see very little to the contrary. Food for thought. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.